Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Bava Daf Mem Aleph, and we're starting at the Mishnah toward the top, about 8 lines down or so on Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph. The Mishnah teaches us an important din that we've learned before about the punishment of kofar, which is a financial punishment that is paid if my animal gores your animal. If my animal gores a person and kills a person, so then there's a special din of kofar. Yesterday, we spoke about a chakira within the world of kofar. Is kofar a din in you, the nizak, or is kofar a din in me, the mazik, in that I need a kapara? So there was a machlokas if kofar was kapara or if kofar was mamona that we spoke about yesterday. But really, the fundamental din of kofar is found right here. The Mishnah opens, Shor shenogach es ha'adam v'meis. If my animal gores a person and the person dies. So it depends on what type of animal my animal was, the animal that did the goring. If it was a muad, then mishalim kofar. The din of kofar only applies by an animal that's a muad. However, v'tam, if you're dealing with an animal that's docile, so then pater mina kofar. That's din number one. And now, v'zeh v'zeh chayav in misa. In both cases, whether or not the animal that kills the person is a muad or a tam, in both cases the animal is chayav misa, the animal will be put to death. V'chein, these halachos also apply beben, v'chein bebas. This applies with a boy and it applies with a girl as well. Rashi says 8 lines down, dibur hamas, no, incorrect, 4 lines down, 5 lines down, v'chein beben, v'chein bebas, ben katan, a young boy, v'tinokes kitana, or an infant girl, chayav alein skila, v'kofer kigdolim. That's what it says, that the same halachos that apply by adults apply to young children. That's din number one about my animal killing a person, killing a yid. Nagach eved o ama. What if my animal kills a person who is an eved or an ama? This is not an eved ivri, this is an eved kinani. So then this is based on a pasuk in Chumash of nosein shloshim slaim. The owner of the shore that killed the eved or the ama has to pay 30 slaim to the family of the person who died. Bein shehu yafe me'amana, whether or not the eved is worth 100, ubein she'enu yafe ela dinar echad, or if it's a very inexpensive eved, we don't have a subjective measure, we have an objective number that the Torah laid out for us, and that number ignores the actual street market value of the eved. We don't care what they cost. The halacha is, the Torah says that we have to pay 30 slaim if my animal gores an eved or an ama. Now the Gemara has a beautiful question on the Reish of our Mishnah. The Reish says that if you have a tam or if you have a muad, they both die when they gore and kill someone. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. If a tam gets killed for its murder, how does a tam ever become a muad? That's what the Gemara wants to know. We're a quarter of the way down at the open of the Gemara on Mem Aleph Amud Aleph. Once the din is that we kill a tam, even if that tam, which is docile, if that tam gores, even though it's a tam, we still kill it. So then how did we ever get to the place of muad? Muad heichi mishkachasla. The Gemara is going to present a whole host of answers, a couple of which don't work, a couple of which do. And here's the first one. So what does this mean that they were measured by 3 people? Take a look at Rashi, 7 lines down. Dibur hamaschil at the open of the Gemara, she'imduhu l'shlosha b'nei adam. Rashi says, the animal ran after these 3 people, zeh achar zeh, ubarchu mipanav, and the people ran away from the animal, v'imdu, and they assessed, she'im lo barchu hayahorgan. So this is a fascinating suggestion that perhaps we can establish muad, not based on what actually happened in that this animal gored 3 times, but in that had the animal actually gored, it would have killed, but not in fact that it did kill. So this is something that is a very odd possibility, and the Gemara doesn't like this at all. And the Gemara rejects this as follows. The Gemara says, I don't understand. Rav Ashi Amar, umdin alav klumhu. When it comes to establishing whether or not an animal is considered muad, your umdana, your assessment, does not matter. We need this animal to actually gore 3 times in order to become a muad. Who cares what you feel about it, what you project? Your projections are irrelevant. The only way we ever establish muad is by 3 gorings in a row. So therefore, let's move to answer number 2. How do we get a tam to become a muad, like our Mishnah says? The Gemara says, we don't have an author for this answer. It endangered three people. So here, the Rishonim explain that we're dealing with a case like this. The animal gored person number one, but person number one did not die. Very much injured, but did not die. Then the animal gores person number two, and also the person did not die. And then on day three, the animal gores person number three, and in that one moment, all three people die. The first two died from their previous injuries, and the third died right away. So what did you have? You had an animal that up until now was considered a tam, but in one moment, because three people died due to this animal, he became a muad instantaneously. So this is the possibility the Gemara wants to recommend. Rav Zvid Amar Kigon Sheharag Shlosha Behemos. Rav Zvid said, you're right that he might not yet be a muad for a person, but he is a muad for killing behemos, and maybe we can make an extension that from an animal who we know is muad to kill another set of shvarim, maybe he's also muad la'adam. The Gemara rejects this. Muad lebehema have a muad la'adam? Absolutely not. That for sure doesn't work. So then the Gemara moves to its third answer. And the Gemara says, it's fourth answer. And the Gemara says, Ela Amar of Simi, Kigon Shaharag Shlosha Ovde Kochavim. Perhaps a better comparison, says the Gemara, is that when an animal gores an Ovde Kochavim, three people who are Ovde Kochavim, perhaps they are in the case scenario of moving from Tam to Muad. Says the Gemara, that's not possible. And this is a fascinating line. Nobody on the page speaks about it. I did some research. Don't see anything in the Meforshim openly. I'm sure the Art Scroll deals with it. I'm sure the Mesivta deals with it. I don't have those books with me. But the Gemara says, the fact that the animal was Horeg Shlosha Ovdei Kochavim, who says that that carries over to a Yid? Asks the Gemara just about halfway down. The fact that an animal is willing to gore an Oved Kochavim, that animal will successfully gore a Yid. In other words, if an animal is muad to kill goyim, he's lav dafka muad to kill yidden. Why is this? So Rabbi Reznik explained in the shiur that yidden have a higher level of siyata dishmaya. There's more hashgacha pratis. There's a different shmira. We all learn Torah Baruch Hashem, so Torah is magno matzah. We have extra protections that the average goy pasha doesn't have. Even the mitzvah of tzitzis, we know it protects a person from ayin hara. Goyim don't have that mitzvah. So there's a lot of reasons to assume this. That's just intriguing that seemingly nobody talks about it. At least not the people that I saw. I looked at the Marsha. I looked in the Likut in the back of the Gemara. I didn't see anybody talking about it. Not Rashi here. There's no Musaf Rashi in the Gemara that I have here. I didn't see anything in Tosfos. Nevertheless, the Gemara's question assumes that a Yid has a greater shmira than a Goy. Therefore, that answer doesn't work either. Perhaps an animal can go from being a tam to being a muad by killing three people who are begeder treifa. There is a din that if a person is begeder treifa, we halachically assume that that person will not live out the next 12 months. Let's say, Rahman al-Islam, a person has a diagnosis that they won't make it through the next 12 months. Halacha l'maisa, they have a din of a treifa. The din of a treifa would be is that if an animal gored a treifa, we would not kill the animal in such a case. So that would be an interesting nafkamina because the person is alive, but they're basically partially dead in halachic terms. So let's say perhaps a person can transfer from tam to muad by killing three treifas. Says the Gemara, no. Muad the treifa have a muad l'shalim. How can you say that an animal killing a treifa is the same as an animal killing a shalim? It's much easier to kill someone who's on their deathbed. They're not moving. They're a stationary target. Ma'ashenkin, if you have someone who's healthy and they're in the chasing of the bull, they're going to run, they're going to jump, they're going to hide. So you can't compare the goring of an animal toward a treifa to a person who is a shalim. The Gemara therefore recommends another answer. Ela Amar Rav Papa, and this is a very practical answer, to katal ve'arak le'agma. In the first two case scenarios, the animal gored, but ran away down to the water banks, and nobody knew exactly where the animal was. So Bezdin wasn't able to mete out the punishment of killing the tam. And then when it killed the third time, the animal, in fact, became a muad. This answer, as you can see with the notes here, is quoted in the Rambam, and it's quoted in the Sefer HaMitzvos as well, in the Smag. Okay, that's Rav Papa's answer. And the last answer for this piece of the Gemara is Rav Acha Bered Rav Ika Amar, a little bit more than halfway down. Kigon Shehuzmu Zomime Zomimin. Now, let's just explain this idea. Let's say that my animal kills a person, Rahman al-Islam. So then there are Eidim who give testimony that, in fact, my animal gored. It turned out that those Eidim were Eidim Zomimin, and therefore their testimony did not work. So my animal supposedly gored. It was based on the testimony of Eidim, and those Eidim were Huzam. They became Eidim Zomimin. The same thing with the second animal. So there were two claims against my animal that my animal had killed. But both of the sets of Eidim were established as Eidim Zomimin. And then after my animal kills a third time, we find out retroactively that really all of the Eidim were valid. What happened? The Eidim who gave Eidus on the first animal on the first person that was killed, and the Eidim who gave Eidus on the second person that was killed. While at the time we had Eidim to say that those Eidim were Eidim Zomimin, now we bring a set of Eidim that were Mazim, the Eidim who made those Eidim into Zomimin. And that is how you can get a case scenario where an animal goes from a tam to muad in one moment. What happened, in short, is that the Eidim that made the other Eidim Zomimin, they were in fact Huzam. So a little bit of a complicated case. You can see Rashi for more details. And that brings us to the next little piece of the Gemara, which is as follows. Hanicha, I'm willing to accept your answer of how the animal got from tam to muad, ili ude tura ba'inon shapir. If what you're saying is that we need to know about the animal, that we need to know that the animal did three things. But ili ude gavra ba'inon, if in fact what we need is not just to know that the animal did three things, but we need the Bailim to know that the animal was goring, because without the Bailim knowing that the animal is goring, they have no way to improve their shmira. They have no way to improve their watching of the animal. So if that's what's happening, then Meimar Omar lay, with a lot of the answers that we just heard, the 6-7 answers that we just saw, in numerous cases, the Bailim can say, Lo hava yadana. I didn't know that I'll just use an example. I didn't know that my animal gored 3 treifas. He went over to a place where, a facility of those who are terminally ill, and he gored 3 people. I had no idea. So if I don't know between the time that he gores 2 and 3, in other words, before the animal becomes a muad, if I, as the Bailim, don't know that, you cannot hold me accountable. So again, if what you're telling me is that I don't need the Bailim to establish muad, I just need 3 episodes of the cow goring, no problem. But if in fact we need the Bailim to be involved, then that's a problem, because Mehechatesi that they knew. So says the Gemara, Kigon da Amri kol emas dikotil tore, gabe have a koy. Says the Gemara in Ukinta, we're going to couple with one of the answers from above that yes, the Bailim did in fact know about it. Ravina Amar, Ravina gives another answer, lav dafka, that the Bailim were aware of this, but rather the makirin es bal hashor ve'ein makirin es hashor. People knew who the owner of the shore was, but they didn't know it was Betsy. They didn't know which shore it was. So they would come over to me and say, Phil, I know your animals are branded. It says Karesh branded on the back of the animal. So I know it was one of your animals. I don't know which of your animals. Says the Gemara, my havalela mebad. If I don't know which animal, which particular animal of mine was doing the goring, I have no way to improve my shmira. So that's not fair either. So says the Gemara, mishum da amre lei, because people who saw his anonymous animal, again, they didn't know what the name of the animal was, but the people who saw this could say, Torah nagchana islach bivkarcha. You have among your flock, you have an animal that's being a nagchan, that's being a gorer, that's becoming muad. You need to take more shmira. You need to go in and you need to be a little bit more careful. So the Gemara establishes one of 6 or 7 answers to show us how it's possible that an animal can move from a tam to a muad without the tam getting killed, because as the Mishnah taught us, when an animal does kill a person, bein tam, bein muad, the halacha is that the animal's chayav misa. So we came up with these answers, and then the Gemara says that either it must be that he knew about it the whole time, or where somebody warned him generally about his animals, that his animals were acting wildly. That brings us to the 2 dots and a very exegetical sugya, where we're going to be analyzing psukim and trying to figure out which words in the pasuk mean which thing. The Gemara says, 2/3, 3/4 of the way down on Mem Aleph Amud Aleph at the two dots, Tanu Rabbanan, we have a brisa. Mimashma shenemar, because we know the pasuk says Sakol Yisakel Hashor, that the shore gets killed for killing a person. Why then does the pasuk also say that the animal's an avelam? You can't eat an animal that's been stoned to death. The only animals that we're allowed to eat are animals that have been shechted properly. The rov kana veshed with a sharp enough knife, with no dents in the knife. It's got to be perfect. Pashat that the animal's an avela. Once we're stoning the animal, at leisman depalig, everybody knows that the animal's an avela. So if that's true, why would the pasuk say that? Ben avela asura be'achila. We already know that. So why does it say that it's an avela? Why does the pasuk go out of its way to say that you can't eat it? It would have been enough for me just to see the word sakol yisakel hashor. You can't go hunting and eat an animal. That's not, it's a completely usher. That animal's an avela. It's an isur d'oraisa to eat it. It says the Gemara, why does the pasuk say lo ye'achelas b'saro if it already says sakol yisakel hashor? Says the Gemara, Magid l'cha akasu, the Torah is teaching us, she'im shachato la'achar shenigmar dino, aser be'achila. That even if, after the Gemar din, let's be clear, after the Gemar din that an animal is chayv misa, if you take a shchita knife and you do a perfect shchita on this animal, and you do a perfect cut, it's 100% perfect shchita, that animal is still usher to eat. That's the chiddush of the Gemara. Why does it say the extra pasuk if we know that the animal's already a nevela? To teach us that between the Gemar din and the time the animal was supposed to be killed. Let's say the Gemar din was on January 1st. It gored on December 21st. On January 1st, there was a Gemar din, the animal needed to be killed. On January 10th was supposed to be the day the animal was killed. And on January 5th, I do a perfect shechita on that animal. Halacha l'maisa, you're not allowed to eat that animal. We're going to question this in a moment. Says the Gemara, Eini ela be'achila. I only know about a restriction in regards to achila. Oh, here we're seeing another level. How do we know that when it comes to this animal that has a gemar din of skila, namely an animal, a shore that killed a person that has a gemar din of skila, how do I know that not only am I not allowed to eat that animal even with a perfect shchita, but that also there's an isur hana? So this, the Gemara says, Talmud Nomar ubal hashor naki. The owner of the shore is naki, he is clean. That's the end of the brisa. Gemara asks a couple of analytical questions. My mashma, how do we know what Bal Hashor Naki means? I might have thought that Bal Hashor Naki means that he doesn't have to pay anything. That might have been a balabatish way to understand the pasuk. It also would have been wrong. So the Gemara says, my mashma, and 15 lines or so from the bottom, the Gemara says, Shimon ben Zoma Omer, Ka'adam she'omer lechavero. That's like a man says to his friend, Yatsa ish ploni naki min chasav ve'ein lo bahem hanoah shel klum. It's kind of like a colloquialism of the day that a person says, I am completely cleaned out, I have nothing left. So in the same way that in that colloquialism, when it says naki, it means that a person has nothing left. So too over here, it means that a person can access nothing. That's why when the pasuk says Bala Shor Naki, that he's clean, it means he's completely cleaned out. He can't even have hana from the shore. So that's what the Gemara says is the drasha of the pasuk of Ubala Shor Naki, is to teach us that there's an Isser Hana on an animal that has had a Gemar din of Misa for killing a person. Says the Gemara, Umimai de lo ye'acheles bisaro. We looked at the pasuk of lo ye'acheles bisaro, and what did we say about that drasha just a moment ago? We said lehecha de shachto achar shenigmar dino sha'aser be'achila. We said that pasuk taught us that on January 5th, if I shechted between the Gemar din and the scheduled killing of the animal, the skila, that if I shechted it, it's usher to eat. Says the Gemara, maybe not. Ema, perhaps we could say another possibility. 9 lines from the bottom of the page. Maybe we should say dehecha de shachtu la'achar shenigmar gemar dino really shari ba'achila. That's not what the pasuk means when it says lo ye'acheles bisaro. The high lo ye'acheles bisaro lehecha de skila de sakle misakel de aser be'anahu. Perhaps it's teaching us something else, that when an animal has been stoned, even afterwards, there is still an Isser Hana. Where would we have seen precedence for this? We would have seen precedence for this to the Rabbi Abo. Amar Rabbi Abo, Amar Rabbi Lazar. Kol makom shenemar lo ye'achel, lo sochel, lo sochelu, echad Isser Achila, echad Isser Hana b'mashma. So maybe Rabbi Abo's approach is correct. The lo ye'achel es bisaro teaches us an Isser Achila, and teaches us an Isser Hana. But not that if you do Shchita between the Gemar Din and the scheduled date of Skila, that the animal would be Aser. And let's just finish up the drush of Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Abahu quoted Rabbi Lazar that these things are always going to be considered with the language of Lo Ye'achel. There's always an Isser Hana and Isser Achila, except for the fact where the Torah teaches us that there are certain scenarios where we can give an avela to a ger, the ger ben estina lo bekochav ben mechira, that we can sell it to those people. That's allowed, but in general, we would have otherwise assumed not. So that's what the Gemara says is a real possibility. Maybe we learned the drasha the wrong way. To this, the Gemara responds 5 lines from the bottom. Amre, we would answer Hani Mili, Heicha denafik le Isra achila ve'isra na mikra v'lo yachel. I agree with Rabbi Abahu. I agree that there might have been another way to learn our pasuk of Sakol Yisakel, followed by V'lo Yechel es Besaro. But that's only if the Isra Achil and Isra Hana were learned out by the same thing. But that wasn't true by our case. Because if you look back up at the Bryce at the 2 dots, the Gemara quotes it, Aval Hacha de Isra Achila mi Sakol Yisakel nafka. Here, the Isra Achila did not come from the pasuk of Lo Yechel. We cannot trigger the din of Rabbi Abahu. And that's why we still need to assume that the Isser of Achila applies if you shech the animal between the Gemar Din on January 1st and the scheduled date of Skila on January 10th, if you shecht it on the 5th. So therefore, it's still going to be Aser Be'achila. However, in Isal Kadaita, Chai Lo Yachel es Betharo Isser Hanahu. If you want to say it's Isser Hana, then the pasuk should have said Nichtov Rachmana Lo Yehaneh. Because since we already learned the Isra Achila from Sakol Yisakel, the pasuk of Lo Ye'achel at this point can't mean about Achila. But if it's only about Hana, then just write what you mean, which is Lo Yehaneh. Inami, you should write Lo Ye'achel, but then the words Es Bisaro Lamali, why are those words there? If you just wanted to add in Hana, Lo Ye'achel would have been fine. Es Bisaro Lamali, that's why the Gemara says on the bottom of Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph, on the very bottom line, short Shchita, even though you treated this animal, an animal that had a Gemar Din of Misa for killing a person, even though otherwise the animal had a perfect shchita, but therefore the Gemara says Aser. It has to be that way. We could have done Rabbi Abo if we hadn't learned out the Isra Achila from Sakol Yisakel, but because we learned out the Isra Achila from Sakol Yisakel, so therefore we are not able to make such a drasha, and therefore our din remains that if a person takes an animal who had a Gemar din of Misa on January 1st and shechted it perfectly on January 5th, the animal is an Isser de Oraisa to eat 100%. This is great Gemara trivia. What is a case scenario where an animal has a perfect shchita and it's completely usher to eat? The answer is when it has a Gemar din for having killed a person. Asks the Gemara on the bottom line of Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, Maskif Lamar Zutra. Ema, perhaps we should say, Hani Mili, that this was only true as we turn to the top of Mem Aleph Amud Beis, and we'll be going to the 4th line of Mem Beis Amud Aleph. That's only true. This is fascinating. And we've seen this before in Shas. Where did we see this before? Don't know. What if I take a rock, a flint stone, as it were, and I sharpened it to the point that I can do shchita? So the Gemara says, maybe we should say that the only time that an animal that had shchita after the Gemar Din and the animal's treif is if the shchita was done by a stone. So take a look at a fascinating Rashi. Why is it that if you use a rock, we would have assumed that the animal is not kosher? Because Rashi says, Dibur Hamaskal, Hecha de Badak Tzur, Dehainu Ke'ein Skila Be'avanim, that because the blade that you're using is a blade that's made out of stone, so then maybe it's begeder, it's under the umbrella of skila. And therefore, Sakol Yisakel, it's usher to eat. However, that was the Avdeke in Skila. However, says the Gemara on the second line, but if I would have used a blade, a proper shchita knife like the ones that we use, the shchita knives that we use for chickens are smaller than a meat cleaver. They're like probably they're a little bit shorter. They're more flatter but rectangular. They're not meat cleavers that are much larger rectangles. The shchita ones are probably about this big for chickens, and they're cleavers for close to cleavers for cows. So says the Gemara, maybe I could make a deal that if you would have used a stone as your blade, then yeah, that's when it would have been usher after the Gemar Din. Masha Ein Kain, had there been a Gemar Din, but you cut with a knife, maybe the animal would have been kosher. Says the Gemara, no. Amri, where do you get that from? That's not a thing. The distinction between blade materials is irrelevant. Says the Gemara, Amri atu sakin ksiva be'oraisa. Where does the Torah say how you have to shecht with which material? We don't care how you shecht it. The shaila lemaisa comes up in regards to bris milah. You can use any material that cuts, but the poskim discuss about using a laser. Can you use a laser for bris milah? So most poskim are not a fan of that because that's not cutting. That's not a device that's cutting. You're cutting with heat. You're cutting with a concentration of heat. So therefore, that may not work. It says the Gemara, after all, the Hatznan, how do we know that the material that's used as a blade for shchita doesn't matter? Because there's a Mishnah in Maseches Chulin that says, "Hashochet b'magal yad," with a thickle, like a hand-sized thickle, b'tzur, with a rak uvekana, or with a reed. The halacha is shchita sokshera. The distinction you're trying to make, that if you were to cut with stone, it would be usher to eat the food, but if you were to cut with a blade, it would be mutter to eat the food. That's not a real thing. It says the Gemara, but wait 1 second. In a case like Rabbi Abahu, who doesn't apply to our Mishnah, but in a case where Rabbi Abahu would apply, where both the Isser Achil and Isser Hana are learned out from the same thing, then why does the pasuk say Bal Hashor Naki? Lamali. Why does it say Bal Hashor Naki? The Gemara says Lanas Oro. That's true for Hanas Oro. That is only true because to teach us about the skin of the animal. The Salkadai Chamina, I might have thought Besarohu da Aser Behana, that maybe only the flesh is Aser Behana, Aval Ora Nishtere Behana, but perhaps the skin of the animal is mutter to benefit from. Kamash Malan, Bal Hashor Naki, that's what the pasuk means, to teach us that you're not allowed to even benefit from the skin of the animal. Asks the Gemara, there are other Tanoim. Other people learn Bal Hashor Naki for another purpose. We saw one drush on the bottom of the previous page, which we already saw, to teach us that there's no Hana. Come on, and we're going to see more of this later, says the Gemara. So according to them, according to the Shitas who use Bal Hashor Naki to learn about the fact that the or is to learn something other than the or, they use the drasha for other things, then how then do they know that the or of the animal is going to be aser? So to this, the Gemara asks, Tanos ora min ale, says the Gemara, nafkilu me es bisaro. Es, the word es and es bisaro refers to hatafel bisaro, that which is secondary to the basar. My nihu, what is considered tafel to the basar? Says the Gemara, oro. And v'hai tana es lotarish. The other tana, who holds that we learn that the skin is usher to benefit from this animal that has a gemar din, that he learns it from Bal Hashor Naki, what does he do with the word es? So famously, we've seen this gemara a couple times in Shas, es lo darish. Kiditanya, we have a brisa. Shimon ha'amsuni, v'amrim la Nechemya ha'amsuni, we're not sure what his first name was, hayadorish kol es in Shevat Torah. He took on a pet project. He was going to go through every S in Chumash, and he was going to figure out what a Kadosh Baruch Hu intended with the word S. Even though when we translate a Chumash, we never translate the word S in a proper way. It's kind of it's just a word that makes a sentence smooth, but we don't really have a translation, different than the English language. It says the Gemara, he made a drush on the S in Shevat Torah. However, Kevan Shehigia, and we're halfway down on Mem Aleph on the base. Kevan Shehigia le'es Hashem Elokecha tira piresh. When he got to the pasuk of Es Hashem Elokecha tira, he stopped darshaning Esed, because what is tafel to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? If we have an obligation to fear Hashem, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is nimtza kan, he's with us always. What is the closest thing to that? There is no close thing to that. There's nothing that relates to the yira of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bichlal. We can barely understand it intellectually. Certainly to apply it to other things. I could understand fear of a parent. I could understand fear of a melech. I could understand fear of authority. But to understand fear of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, nothing is even a close second by any measure. So therefore, Shimon, or Nechemya ha'amsuni, stopped his drasha. He stopped darshaning assets. So his student said back to him, Amr lo talmida, Rebbe, kol esen shedarashta ma tahe'alem. You got to the pasuk of Es Hashem Elokecha tira. You've been working through this for years, however long it took him. What are you going to do with all of your drashas? If what you're saying is that when the pasuk says Es Hashem Elokecha tira, that you don't know how to darshan that S, then perhaps all of the Esim that you darshan were all incorrect. So he gave a beautiful idea. Amar lahen geshem shekibalti schar al hadrisha. Just like I got reward for the darshaning, for the hard work of trying to figure out and to infer what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu want from me with the word es. So too, kach kibalti schar al haprisha. Such a beautiful idea. We don't, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not mekapeach schar kol beria. We learned this a couple of blot ago. This person worked very hard in Talmud Torah. So he worked very hard. He found out his pathway was wrong. Okay. So he gets a schar for the prisha too, for stopping to go the path that he's on. So we get stuck in our own ways. It's easy to follow a pattern, but it's lav dafka that it's good. However, as we famously know, Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva v'limeid es Hashem elokecha tira l'rabos talmidei chachamim. Here, Rabbi Akiva took this a little bit to the next level. He said, I know exactly what to tell you in regards to the es of Es Hashem Elokecha Tira, and that is that we should have yira for Talmidei Chachamim in a similar way. Of course, the entities are not the same, obviously. Kodesh Baruch Hu has no ein domelo, but the next thing in line, while granted a very, very far distant second, is Talmidei Chachamim, and we should make sure that we treat them with a similar kavod. So that's what the Gemara says, and that brings us to the 2/3 of the way down. Let us continue. Tanu Rabbanan ubala shor naki, and we're now. This is what the Gemara meant earlier when we see authors of bala shor naki, other Tanaim, who do different things with the phrase of bala shor naki. So then let's see what this brisa says in regards to bala shor naki. The brisa says bala shor naki Rebbe Elazar Omer naki mechatzi kofer. Is that if we're dealing with a case of tam, a tam does not pay chatzi kofer. You'll recall from the Mishnah that we started with tonight on Mem Aleph Amud Aleph that if a muad does the damage, then he pays kofer. If a tam does the damage and kills a person, there's no chatzi kofer, there's no kofer. This brisa is reflecting the same idea that there's no chatzi kofer by a tam. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva pushes back and says, hey, wait. V'halohu atzmo ein mishtalim ela megufo. A person whose animal is a tam, who kills a person, what's the punishment when your animal kills the tam? It's always migufo. But if that's true, and the animal were to be killed, there's nothing to pay. What do you mean chatzi kofer? There's no animal anymore. Why? Because the animal was killed. And a little tongue in cheek, the Gemara says, "Have you lebezdin v'shalamach? Go to Bezdin, and they'll pay you." Namely, Bezdin took your animal and killed it because your animal killed a person. Of course, there's no chatzi kofer. Pasha that there's no chatzi kofer. Rabbi Akiva says to Rabbi Eliezer, and then with a little bit of a bite, Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says back to Rabbi Akiva, Kachani be'einecha. Is that what you think of me, Rabbi Akiva? Says Rabbi Eliezer. You think that Shadini Bazeh Shechayev Misa? I'm talking about a case where the animal is Chayev Misa. Of course I know that. What? It's very hard to understand this dialogue because Taka, Rabbi Eliezer is a big Talmud Chacham. So what was Rabbi Akiva thinking that Rabbi Eliezer even meant? Of course we weren't dealing with a case where the animal had a din Chayev Misa. And then Rabbi Eliezer explains himself more and he says, we're only talking about a case, the case where he says that the owner of the tam animal is not chayev chatzi kofer, is dealing with a case where we saw that the animal killed, but there was only one aid, or it was al pi bailim, and if the bailim of the animal that was killed is the witness to the murder, that's considered a bad aid. He's not allowed to testify. So in those cases, that's when Rabbi Eliezer was teaching his din about chatzi nezek, about not paying chatzi kofer, but not what Rabbi Akiva meant. Rabbi Akiva misunderstood Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said no chatzi kofer by a tam. Rabbi Akiva says, of course not. The animal is going to get killed. Rabbi Eliezer says, of course, I wasn't talking about that case. Obviously not. I was talking about a case where there was only one aid and the animal doesn't have a din of misa. So that was his first retort. Al pi bailim, mode biknasu. In regards to al pi bailim, when there's the edus of the bailim himself, because if I'm the baal of the mazik, I can be mode biknas. If I see my animal, I never have to pay anything because mode biknas is pater, and I can always get myself out of it. Because savar, it must be that kufra kapara, that I'm measuring against myself. If my animal killed and I'm mode biknas, it must be that mode biknas is kapara, and that's why I'd be pater if I was mode. So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva are two ships passing in the night. They're not even talking about the same case. And fascinatingly, there's almost an identical brisa of the dialogue where Rabbi Akiva says, I'm actually talking about a different case than what we saw in the previous brisa. And let's see which answer holds water. We're 6-7 lines from the bottom, the first of the very long lines of Mem Aleph Amud Beis. Tanya Idach, we have another brisa. Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer, Akiva, This is what you think of me. You thought I was talking about a case where an animal had a din misa? Shadini bozeh shechai misa? Absolutely not. Ein dini ela b'miskaven la'arog es habehema v'hareg es ha'adam. I was talking about a case where a person did kill a person, but his intention, where an animal killed a person, but the animal's intention was really to kill another animal, or lemitzri b'harag Yisrael, or if the animal, the shore, was intending to kill a mitzri, who's an oved kochavim, as opposed to a yid, or lenefalim, for a child who is slated, is just not going to live, a child that won't live beyond 30 days, but beharag ben kayama, and accidentally killed someone. So there's two different possibilities as to what Rabbi Eliezer retorted to Rabbi Akiva. No matter what, in both brises, it's two ships passing in the night, where Rabbi Akiva thought Rabbi Eliezer was talking about X, and Rabbi Eliezer was not talking about X. So now we have two answers. Our first brisa said we were talking about a case where my shore killed Rahman al a person, and Rabbi Eliezer said it was a case where there was only one aid. And the second answer that Rabbi Eliezer said is that my animal did kill a person, even with aidim, but the animal's intentions were different. So asks the Gemara, Hi Omar le Beresha. Which answer did Rabbi Eliezer retort back to Rabbi Akiva first? Was it brisa number one, which is that the witness was only a one-person witness, so not enough to indict? Or was it answer number two, where there were plenty of witnesses, but everyone witnessed that the animal was not trying to kill a person, but trying to kill an animal? So Rav Kahana Mishmei de Rava Amar Miskavein Amar Leberesha, he says that the second brisa was first, the brisa that indicates that my shore was not intending to kill a person, but only to kill a shore. However, Rav Yumi Mishmei de Rava Amar Hemis Asher Amar Leberesha, the first brisa, where the animal killed with only one witness present, he says that one went first, and that now let's go through both of them. We're at the second of the last lines here on Mem Aleph Amud Beis. Rav Kahana Mishmei de Rava Amar Miskavin Amar Leberesha, and he said that really the brisa of Kavana, the second brisa, was Rabbi Eliezer's first answer, and mashal, and the Gemara gives a mashal as to how we deal with the fact that there was a later brisa. Really, the second brisa that was presented was actually presented first, followed by the second. Mashal et sayed sheshola dagim minayam. Let's talk about someone who's a fisherman. Says the Gemara, turning to the top of Mem Beis Amud Aleph, Mishkach Rav Revei Shakil. If you find a huge fish, you most definitely will take it. Zutri, and then if afterwards you're like, I had a great catch, but I still want to get a few more pounds of fish, so then Shakil, then of course I'll take the second. I'll take even the smaller ones. What this means is that Rabbi Eliezer had two answers. He had the second brisa, and he had the first brisa. He had the retort back to Rabbi Akiva that really fundamentally the kavana of my animal was to kill another animal and not a person. And then he also has the first brisa, which is also valid, which is that yes, my animal killed, but there was only one witness. However, on the top of Mem Beis Amud Aleph on the top line, Rav Yumi Mishmei de Rava Amar, no, Hemis Amar Leberesha, really, the first brisa was the one that was there, but the second brisa seemingly wasn't at all. He gives a similar mashal. Mashal et sayed sheshola dagim min hayam. We have a person who's standing on the coast and he's fishing. He has a big fish net. Mishkach zutri shakil. He's catching, 4-inch little tiny carp and bass, little sunfish, nothings. He's catching a bunch of small little nothings. But then mishkach rav revi. But then he pulls in a 25-pound salmon. A whole new ballgame. So then what does he do with the salmon? He keeps the salmon and he throws back all the little pitzel fish. Shadi zutre, he takes the small ones. Vishakil ravrave, he gets rid of the small ones and he keeps the big one. Namely, this is of course a mashal, that according to Rav Yumi Mishmei de Rava, only the first brisa was actually valid. And that is how the two of them break down these two answers of Rabbi Eliezer. We're going to stop right here. My schedule should be that I should be at the Beis Medrash on time tomorrow night. I will let you know if anything changes. If you hear nothing from me, that means we're learning in person tomorrow night in the main Beis Medrash for Mishmar La'artzenu, and we'll stop right here. Wishing you all a beautiful night.